Jackie and I negate resolve the United States federal government should impose price controls on the pharmaceutical industry. Contention 1 is delays. Beryl from the London School of Economics in 2011 writes that price regulation can delay launch of new drugs because of the inevitable price negotiation between governments and companies, furthering that introductions in price-controlled markets lag up to 2.6 years behind free markets. Unfortunately, Spiegel from the Hill in 2017 writes that this delay can be deadly, as 600,000 European deaths could be avoided each year if healthcare offered timely medical treatments. Contention 2 is cutting off access. Sullivan of Policy and Medicine in 2018 explains that low prices eliminate the rationale for investments in better manufacturing technologies and processes, since price controls limit profit margins. This is empirically proven, as Ridley from Duke University in 2016 writes that low prices reduce the incentive to invest in quality and reliability. Indeed, manufacturing problems, which cause recalls that often halt production, are the main cause of shortages. Unfortunately, a shortage right now would be deadly, because Golan from the Telegraph in 2018 explains that antibiotic supply chains are on the brink of collapse. Price controls would push the global market over this brink, as the Access to Medicine Foundation in May found that because there are few competitors, the failure of even one manufacturer can lead the entire supply chain to collapse. The impact is creating antibiotic shortages. Hirschler from Reuters in 2017 writes that antibiotic shortages have dire consequences, since doctors have to resort to suboptimal treatments that are less efficient at killing pathogens. This is critical, as Ashiru 2015 from Public Health Matters contextualizes that 37 million lives worldwide have been saved by antibiotic treatment for TB since 2000. Contention 3 is cutting R&D. Currently, the pharmaceutical industry is pouring money into developing drugs to combat rare diseases. Ian Lloyd writes for Pharma Projects that as of October 2016, more than 4,000 drugs are in development for 447 rare diseases, demonstrating increased research within areas of unmet needs such as cancer. Unfortunately, this is an extremely costly process, as Giacoto 2005 from the University of Chicago writes that it takes 16 years and costs $802 million in research and regulatory expenses to bring a drug to market. As a result, companies often price drugs so that they can recoup investment. Unfortunately, price controls will harm the development of these life-saving drugs in two ways. First is because companies will reduce spending in R&D. Weingarten from Forbes in 2017 writes that price controls make it more difficult for manufacturers to recoup the cost of capital, diminishing the incentives to innovate. Thus, Vernon 2004 from the University of North Carolina concludes that regulating prices in the U.S. could lead to a decline in R&D of up to 32.7%. Second is because venture capital investors pull out due to insufficient profit margins. East in 2018 from Stat News writes that if profitability for new drugs declined, venture capital for risky long-term biopharmaceutical investments would shrink exponentially. Unfortunately, Platzer 2006 from the NBCA continues that virtually the entire biotechnology industry would not exist without venture capital. There's historical precedent for this. Millam in 2009 writes that when the Clinton administration proposed to place caps on the price of drugs, the industry reduced R&D spending by $1.6 billion. It was not until companies were sure the plan had failed that R&D spending returned to previous levels. If price controls had been successfully implemented, Santier finds that this would have led to 198 fewer new drugs being brought to the U.S. market from 1981 to 2000. The impact is saving lives. Lloyd concludes that rare disease patients as a whole are estimated at 350 million people worldwide, and the ITIF finds that pharmaceutical innovation accounted for 73% of the increase in life expectancy worldwide. Thus, Jackie and I are proud to negate.
Is everybody good? Albie and I affirm resolve. The United States federal government should impose price controls on the pharmaceutical industry. Our sole contention is correcting the market. There's a crisis in the United States revolving around the affordability of pharmaceutical drugs. Henry Waxman of the Commonwealth Fund reports from 2017 that drug prices have increased 10% annually, exceeding inflation. Court of Market Watch corroborates in 2017, finding that the price of most common medications have increased by 85%. Dana Sarnek of Johns Hopkins University Florida explains in 2017, compared to other high-income developing countries, U.S. prices are 117% higher and health outcomes are significantly worse. Pharmaceutical companies are at fault. Fox of the Harvard Business Review in 2017 reports that drug companies utilize a number of tactics to thwart competition, including bribing generic companies to keep cheap alternatives off the market, filing citizen petitions to delay generics from being federally approved, and restricting smaller business access to drug samples for testing. Big Pharma has consolidated a market with monopoly-esque tactics, effectively preventing affordable options from entering the market. Even generic drugs, supposedly more affordable, are driven off the market by Big Pharma. Large branded companies spike their prices right before generic entry to ensure high price points for both drugs. Dave of the International Medicine quantifies in 2017, an average price increase of 30% increases generic drug prices by 60% as well. Thus, Dean Baker of New York Times concludes in 2017 that the prices are hundreds of times the normal free market price. When the market fails, the government steps in to put it back on track. Price controls correct the pharmaceutical market in two ways. First, directly setting the price. Price control means that firms aren't allowed to set prices above a certain level, leading to lower prices for consumers. No matter how much the industry is consolidated or exploits the market, the end result must be lower prices. Empirically, this has happened in similar countries that impose price controls. Marzak of the Croatian Medical Journal in 2002 reports all EU countries have imposed pricing and saw lower prices by 25%. Thus, in the bigger market of the United States, Acosta of the Cochrane Library quantifies in 2014 that price controls in the U.S. will reduce costs by 49% in just 1 year. Second is stopping consolidation. Sorcha of Public Citizen magazine reports in 2016, over the past few years has seen the consolidation of the pharmaceutical industry as larger companies have captured 64% of the global market, up from 28% in 2007. Companies consolidate to increase prices. Gagnon and Globalization Health Journal in 2017 reports several companies dominate the non-competitive markets by cornering niche markets through killer acquisitions so they can substantially increase prices. Price controls reverse this because they remove the reason that companies monopolize in the first place. If they cannot increase prices, they have no incentive to acquire. But additionally, it makes it inefficient to have a monopoly in the first place since they can no longer offset the high development costs with having high prices. Sood of the Rand Corporation in 2008 explains direct price controls reduce Big Pharma revenues by 16%. For these two reasons, Brecky of the Journal of Public Economics quantifies in 2010, under price control systems, large monopolies see a 15% reduction in brand name market shares and a drop in average prices by 30%. Correcting the market increases prescription access in two levels. First, in the United States, Waxman argues that 1/3 of Americans go without taking their prescriptions because of high costs. Fortunately, Levy of the Hebrew University Business School quantifies in 2014, setting prices 20% lower increased number of patients using drugs by 23%. This is critical. Benjamin of the Public Health reports in 2012, there's approximately 125,000 deaths per year in the United States due to non-adherence to prescriptions. Second is in the rest of the world. Bostani of The Guardian explains that Big Pharma requires domestic governments across the world to transfer all intellectual property rights to the United States, meaning they can only buy from us. This extends the U.S. monopoly globally and prevents other countries from developing generics, which is why 1.4 billion people cannot afford the patented drugs needed to save their lives. And 75% of all global HIV patients cannot access cures because they only have patented options in their area. Because medicine should give people their life instead of a receipt, we affirm.
Can I have the first question?
Of course.
Let's look at M&As. Is there a link that because companies have decreased revenue, they can't afford to buy other companies?
There's two reasons why we say we break down monopolies. One, we say the reason why they monopolize in the first place is to be able to hike up prices. If you stop them from being able to hike up prices, they have no incentive to merge.
Wait, hold on.
But
why is that the
can
only
I finish
incentive?
my answer?
Yeah.
I have like a second reason,
Okay.
right? The second one is about capacity. We tell you when you decrease their revenue, they're not going to be able to pay for the mergers and acquisitions, which they want to so much. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Okay. So you read in your first contention there's 600,000 deaths because of delays.
Yes.
What is the evidence actually about?
That's what the evidence is about.
The evidence says there's 600,000 deaths because of colon cancer.
No. So, I realize you just looked at the card and controlled at 600,000. But if you'd gone further, you'd see that the second 600,000
Right.
numbers is about price controls
so
causing delays in
they
Europe.
say there's delays and there's a drug
Yes.
that solves for colon cancer, right? Like it's good for colon cancer. But then the 600,000 deaths isn't because of the delay.
Yeah,
right?
it is.
They just say there's 600,000 deaths because of colon cancer
Yeah,
in general.
the paragraph said delays are deadly.
Alright.
They cause 600,000.
The judges can call
deaths.
for that evidence.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the impact on the global impact. What's the warrant behind this?
The global impact. Okay.
Yeah.
So the second impact is
Yeah.
about other countries getting their intellectual property bought out by the United States monopolies,
What
which
do you
means
mean? if a company in
No, wait.
another country produces a drug,
So I'm
is
about
their
to
patent
explain.
bought by the United States?
Can I explain it?
Yeah.
Okay, so other countries want to make their own branded drugs, but the United States buys up their intellectual property, which means they can only buy from the U.S. patented drugs, which is significantly higher in cost, which is why 1.4 billion people cannot afford the drugs around the entire world.
So
Can I
the
ask you a
U.S.
question?
hold on, the U.S.
Sure.
wants that patent because they want to be able to sell that drug, right?
Right.
So why would that change in an app world?
You decrease their ability to have such a strong monopoly in the
But
app
they
world.
still want to sell the drug.
Okay,
That doesn't change
look,
the incentive
here's the
for buying
comparative
the
analysis
patent.
that you won't do for us. In a con world, you do nothing about the monopolies, which we say exist in the status quo. In the app world, we have a risk of breaking them down. I'm gonna
No,
ask you a
you
question.
don't, because you're not
Okay.
explaining to me the
Look,
solvency.
we're gonna
if the
disagree
company-
on the links, but can I ask you a question?
You never answered my original question.
Okay, so you can ask
If
it.
the company wants to buy a patent because they just want to sell that drug, then why does implementing a price control change that?
Okay, so if you implement a price control, you decrease their ability to form a monopoly, which is how they gain their power to buy up intellectual property.
Okay,
Can
so
I
it's like
ask
they
you a
don't have the
question?
money.
We've
Yeah.
been on this for like a
Yeah,
minute. Okay, so you say that in your third contention that you create innovation right now in the status quo, right? So why do companies innovate?
Because they want to make new drugs to sell them,
Okay, why do they want to make new drugs?
so they can sell.
Okay, so they want to make money, right?
Yeah.
So why would they stop innovating?
Because they literally don't. So when you innovate, you pour billions of dollars into a product, and then you take a risk because you think, oh, I might be able to get billions of dollars of profit back. When you cut into their profit, it's no longer worth the
So,
risk to innovate.
a
those
pharmaceutical
new
company
drugs.
invests in R&D to make money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what is Pfizer's going to sell toiletries just because?
Yeah, they can just sell the drugs they have right now.
Okay.
I'm actually going to start running prep time.
Okay.
Give me 1 second. Starting now. He's prep.
That's 31 seconds.
Wow. Oh my god. Okay. Anyone not ready? It'll just be down the aisle. Start off on their only contention on correcting the market. 3 turns at the top. First, the New Jersey Health Institute says that for every dollar you spend on innovative drugs, you decrease healthcare expenditures by $7.20 because we reduce the incidence of hospitalizations and invasive surgeries, which are on net more expensive. We control the linkage to affordability. Second, turn the contention again because it doesn't matter if drugs get more expensive or less expensive. If there's a shortage of drugs, then no one can access it. But finally, turn the contention again because Mizuki explains that the most probable form of a price control is reference pricing, which Trump just introduced 3 weeks ago. However, in order for reference pricing to happen, these prices in the U.S. are based on other countries' prices. So what would happen is that price companies or pharma companies would just exit markets that are price controlled. For example, when Europe implemented price controls, these pharma companies exited Bulgaria because they didn't want to sell at a low price in Bulgaria, and they didn't want that low price to influence the price of this drug in the reference price market. So at the end of the day, that causes more exits from these developing countries. So at the end of the day, that still links in. But then on the individual warrants, first on this generic spiking stuff. First, realize that even if generic prices are spiked, there's going to be more competition, which will eventually reduce the price of generics. This is because they're saying that when a company spikes the patented drug price, they can also spike the patented generic, or they can also spike the generic price. But the problem is, as more competitors enter the market, the price therefore decreases, which is why Walls finds that even though generic prices, when they first enter the market, are 60% of the patented price, they eventually decrease to 20% of the patented price, and which is why Smith finds that overall generic prices decreased by 12% in 2017. So therefore, we would say that if 90% of Americans use generics, as Forbes explains, we would solve here. But let's go to the true solvencies. First, they say that we're just going to set the price. First, realize that this reduces the incentive to innovate, and it doesn't matter if the price is set if the drug doesn't actually exist. Second, if there's a shortage of drugs, it doesn't matter what price it's set at. But third, this doesn't link into their global patent stuff, so realize they can extend this warrant if they want to go for this global patent stuff. But on the second warrant on mergers, a couple of problems. First, realize that the reason why companies have monopolies is because of patents. It doesn't matter if company A has a patent or company B has a patent. There's only one patent for a drug. That's the reason why monopolies exist. But second of all, he concedes in first cross that there's always an incentive to merge because they always want to increase the capture of market share. So even if you reduce these price gouging, as long as they want more market share, they'll still merge. But finally, the second incentive is they say that you would just decrease revenues of the companies and decrease capacity to merge. But we would just say that pharma companies just take out loans. For example, they're already in millions of dollars of debt. There's no reason why they wouldn't just take out another loan. But finally, even if you buy the M&As are going to stop in the afterward, turn the entire contention because realize that M&As are actually really good. This is because small companies that are the source of most innovation are going to be bought by larger companies. They don't have access, like small companies don't have marketing infrastructure, so they can't bring their drugs to market. But big companies are the only companies that A, can afford to do clinical trials, that's the R&D part, but B, have the marketing research to ensure that this drug gets out on a global scale. So we would say M&As are on net pretty good. But then they say that there's a 16% revenue decrease. We realize that triggers a link into contention 2 and contention 3. On the impact level, first on the US, first realize that just because a third of Americans can't afford these drugs because they're high cost doesn't mean they all die. In fact, Ruth explains that actually insurance covers most of the cost A. So I would say that these high cost drugs probably aren't going to be very, very high cost drugs that insurance covers, but rather just going to be your average generic that people don't think are worth buying. But second of all, realize that they read this Levy card saying that when you have a 20% lower price, you're going to see a demand increase by 23%. But then the Levi card goes on to concede that if you drop prices any lower, you're going to start cutting into R&D. And insofar as the next line of the card says that most other countries with price controls have 60% lower prices, we would see that impact triggered. On the second impact on the world. First, he concedes in first cross that this disincentive to buy a patent never changes insofar as they always want to sell drugs in developing countries, and so the disincentive never changes. It isn't incentivized on price controls. But second of all, we would say that companies in other countries don't recognize these patents. So it doesn't matter if Novartis buys a patent for this drug in India. If the Indian government doesn't recognize this patent, then they can still produce a generic. This is why India is the largest manufacturer of generics in the world. But third, there's two reasons why we would link it. First, because the World Health Organization finds that right now there are regulations allowing developing countries to produce generics of patented drugs. The only reason why the patented drug exists is because there's incentive to innovate. But second of all, because you can turn the entire contention, because what Mola explains is that high drug prices in the US incentivize and allow for subsidies of donations of these drugs, but when you implement price controls, you cut donations of these drugs so that they can no longer be sent to developing countries.
Okay, we're gonna take that. Starting now.
Can we see the Mizuki card?
You want full PDF?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, because I did the thing.
Is it about reference pricing?
Yeah, that's the
Yeah. I just for some I showed it to another judge and I changed the font for some reason and then I just didn't recognize it when I was scrolling through.
That's okay.
Bulgaria, what is it? Withdrawn from. Okay. Okay, here it is.
Thanks. Starting card.
Pause. This one, there's no Mizuki. Or is it like a different one?
Oh, we said this one. Sorry, I just don't know how to pronounce the name.
Oh, okay.
But that's the other.
It's okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Here it is, man.
Okay. Okay. Is everyone ready? I'm starting on my case and going down her responses. Everyone good? Okay.
At the top of your case?
At the top of my case, yes. Okay. The first two terms he puts in our case are just cross applications of shortages and innovation. I'll get to that when I get to their case. But the third term says that reference pricing will just be based on other countries and they're going to exit markets. To exit markets, they have to outsource into a new country that doesn't have price controls. All of the people who've been exiting from Bulgaria and the European Union have come to the United States. But if the United States puts price controls, there's nowhere left for them to outsource insofar as every other high-income developed country has price controls in the first place. We're not going to be seeing this exiting. But secondly, the European Union also has things like price ceiling. So this reference pricing argument doesn't make any sense. If we're going to compare them to the EU, their prices are a lot lower. We still have a link into directly setting the price. Then they read this argument about how generics, now 92% of the market is generics, but that doesn't respond to what we're saying. Generics are still incredibly unaffordable. 1/3 of Americans still cannot afford their prescription. Clearly the generic solution isn't working if for the past 20 years we've seen a steady price increase exceeding the rate of inflation. But then on our first warrant, they just try and link in and say we don't link into our second impact about global patents. If you put a price control on that, then they can't charge it at the high price that the branded companies have, which is why 1.4 billion people can have access. But then on mergers and acquisitions, they say that the patent is always going to exist, so they're always going to have the incentive. They get the patent through mergers and acquisitions. So if you reduce their intent to do that, then we saw the clear link into this. They're not going to have an incentive to merge and acquire anymore, insofar as the development cost of having a monopoly is going to be A, incredibly expensive, but B, the only reason they enter a monopoly in the first place is so that they can hike prices. If you set the price, they don't want to monopolize. Then they say you can take out loans. You can take out loans for innovation too. This really just puts defense on their case as well. But then they say that small companies are good because they can be bought out, but it's a killer acquisition. It's not this symbiotic relationship. They buy up smaller companies so they can put them out of business so that they don't have competition on the market. That's why 64% of the market right now is controlled by one company. Then on the impact level, in our second impact, they say that prices are high here so they can be low in other places. That's not true either. People don't charge low prices in the developing world because they're so philanthropic. It's because they cannot make money otherwise, because a lot of the people in the developing world are impoverished. That's why the price is low there. Let's go on to their case. Their first contention talks about delays. This assumes that companies are going to outsource. This means that they're going to move away to a different market and then enter it in at the other one at a lower rate. That's not probable. There's no other place for them to go. But secondly, it doesn't take long to negotiate a price. The government says you have to charge it at 50% lower. That's not going to delay with negotiations. Their second contention talks about shortages, but there's a couple of issues here. First, they say that you're not going to have the incentive to go into the manufacturing sector. That doesn't make any sense. If you lower manufacturing costs, you'll always make more money. A price control has nothing to do with this. That's why there's not going to be a shortage. But secondly, this entire argument assumes that the price is going to be set below the supply and demand equilibrium, but they miss the Baker evidence in our case. Because of the monopolization of the industry, the price is hundreds of times the normal free market price. Then they say they're not going to have as much quality investment. If you have fewer resources, you always increase quality, because now you can't have so much waste by just a large amount of quantity of goods. There isn't going to be a shortage. We're going to link to this better by deconsolidating the market in the first place, because it's created by one manufacturer. Then on their third contention about research and development, they read this pharma project evidence saying that we have really good new drugs right now. That's from the pharmaceutical sector. Of course they're going to say that. Professor Light of Stanford, who explains in 2014 that 90% of all drugs that come out of the sector are Me Too drugs that have zero clinical significance, because they're just creating Advil and turning it into ibuprofen and making a profit off of this. This is a really big reason to turn the argument against them, because if you have price control, the only drugs that are profitable are the ones that have a clinical benefit, the ones that cure cancer and cure Alzheimer's. So we're increasing the efficiency of innovation, which is really not going well right now. But then secondly, they say that they're going to have fewer amounts of investment into this because of venture capital investment. But the Brookings Institute explains in 2018 that venture capitalism only accounts for 3.2 million of the investment in the billion-dollar industry, which is only 2% of the entire sector. It's a really small argument in terms of the scope of it. But then they assume all of the money and the revenue is going to come out of research and development. That's not true either. They concede in First Crossfire that they're always going to have an incentive to innovate, because that's what makes them money. They're going to take out of things like mergers and acquisitions because they can no longer hike prices. That's what becomes unprofitable. But then finally, you can just have the government subsidize it in the first place. The Los Angeles Times explains that 73% of all new drugs come from the government anyway. The private sector isn't that big a deal.
Okay, let's not 30 seconds taken. Okay. All right. So can I have the first question?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So why do companies buy patents in other like countries?
Like small businesses or big pharmaceutical companies?
Like why do this is specifically to your we're extending the patent monopoly worldwide.
okay,
so why
yeah.
do they buy patents in other countries?
What? They buy patents from other countries? That's not our argument. They shut out the other market in the first place.
How do they shut out the other market?
Because A, they influence free trade deals because the monopoly has a lot of power in Congress. But secondly, and most importantly, is because they are the ones that control the market. They
Wait,
can price,
I never
it's called
heard this
price
free
gouging.
trade deal link in your case.
That was
I
our
didn't
case.
hear deal or Congress or free trade. Anyways, you can't just
Definitely-
shift your advocacy now.
That's not shifting our advocacy. We explicitly said it in case. They influence United States trade deals. That's the industry. But more importantly is the price gouging argument, which I think we've articulated pretty well. They can fluctuate the price to make the local manufacturers go out of business because they can't produce it at that
But
production
you're not
cost.
implementing price controls in other countries, so why would that go
We're
away?
putting it on the United States, who
Yeah.
controls the market in other countries.
But
That's
you're
what we're
not.
saying.
But you're not implementing price controls on other markets. You
That's-
can't just
if-
take price
if
controls in the
United
U.S. and
States
extend it to the rest
controls
of the
their
world.
market, then putting a price
How does
control
the
on
US
them
control their
does that.
market?
That's the evidence that we indicate that reads you. It says that the patented drugs from the United States companies are responsible for having 75% of HIV patients unable to afford it, and 1.4
Yeah,
billion
but that
people
doesn't tell me
can't
anything.
afford the
That
U.S.
doesn't tell me anything. You just tell me
Why?
that people can't
Why
access
doesn't that-
HIV drugs.
Wait.
Why does this mean that patented drugs in the U.S. all of a sudden are going to extend and influence all, like, control
It's
other markets?
happening right now. Like,
How do they
if
control
if
other
it's a
markets? Can you answer
probability
this simple question? How
I
do they
have.
control other
First,
markets?
they influence free trade deals. Secondly, it's price gouging.
So, why would price gouging? Wait, because you can't influence prices in other
if you
countries. with
directly
price.
set the price-
You can't influence prices in other countries with price controls,
yeah,
right?
you can influence the price that the American companies have.
Wait, but you can't influence. No, price controls only affect prices in the U.S., right?
The U.S. industry. We're putting them on the U.S. industry.
No,
we're
it
saying
doesn't
the U.S.
affect
industry
prices.
controls.
So
other
wait,
markets.
let me get this
But
straight.
We've been going
so
about
your
this for a
link,
while.
Like,
It's
really quickly,
getting
it's like a
really
yes or no
muddled.
question.
It's really
a
not.
yes or no question.
Okay, sure.
So your link is that you're putting price controls on the U.S. industry, which controls the price that they set for their products.
Yes.
Yes, okay,
that's
cool,
what
cool,
the
cool,
affirmative-
cool. Okay,
Okay,
cool,
yeah.
cool.
Can I ask
Go
you a
for it.
question?
Yes.
So, why will companies stop producing innovation if that's the one thing that makes them money?
Because they have no choice. At the end of the day, when you implement price controls, they're literally not making money because the prices at which these products are set at are so low that they can't recoup their R&D
Why would we
investment.
set the cure for cancer like if they produce a cure for cancer, won't they make a lot more money than if they just produce another Me Too drug?
Here's the thing, in the status quo, in order to produce a Me Too drug, it doesn't take a lot of money to change the molecular form of the drug a little
yeah.
bit. So the vast majority of R&D spending is probably being spent on cancer drugs, right?
No, that doesn't make any
Wait,
sense.
you just told me it doesn't take a lot of money to
No,
change
no.
Me Too drugs.
Like-
so therefore, the vast majority of R&D spending
No.
is probably going to cancer
Then
drugs,
if
right?
that's the case, then why are 90% of all new drugs coming out of the industry having
Right,
zero
but
clinical
all
significance?
R&D spending is focused on those 10% of drugs, right?
It's
Because you
really-
just told me that the spending doesn't
it's
go
really not.
to
The
no-
public sector is the one who's been funding the actual innovation that's been helping
Okay.
people because they are the ones that actually have their
So to
constituents
win
put
Me Too,
first.
you have to win government.
No, we also disincentivize Me Too drugs in the first place because
Why?
the only drugs that will be profitable in a world in
Oh,
price
yeah,
controls
actually-
are the ones that actually have a clinical benefit.
Okay. Can we see the card saying that 1/3 of generics are actually? No, never mind. Never mind. Okay.
Okay, so it's gonna be after next. Everybody ready? Start off on their first contention. First, on generics. He tries to tell you that 1/3 of people can't afford the prescription drugs. But I would tell you the majority of these people probably can't afford prescription drugs for brand name drugs. However, the majority of Americans, 90%, are using generics. That means that since we tell you that the prices of generics decreased by 12% in 2017. That means in the long run, once generics enter the market, we would solve for affordability. But then, on M&As, they can completely mishandle the term where we tell you that small companies are bought by larger companies. They try to tell you that, like, this is a killer acquisition. But big companies don't compete with small companies. Big companies compete with other big companies, and they do this by buying these small companies out through the innovation, but don't have the infrastructure to market the drug. That's why when these small companies innovate and the big companies market, that just leads to more drugs being brought to market. But then, on this global impact, they are really mishandling this link because they assume that price controls on U.S. companies lower the prices that they're charged everywhere. This is not true. Novartis is a Swiss company, and Switzerland has price controls, yet they charge sky-high prices in the United States because price controls are determined by the market that you're in, not the market that you're from. But even if you do buy this, we would still link in because the World Health Organization tells you that developing countries can still produce generics even if the drug is on patent, so it really doesn't matter. But then, on our case, they really mishandled the first contention on delays because it's not about outsourcing, it's about the negotiation process, which empirically takes 2.6 years, and Spiegel tells you causes 600,000 people to die each year. That outweighs their 125,000 number. But then, on the third contention on R&D, he tried to tell you that they're decreasing Me Too drugs. This doesn't make any sense because they concede in Crossfire that Me Too drugs don't actually cost a lot to produce, meaning that any R&D remaining probably goes to Me Too drugs because they can produce them at a low price but still get a new drug out of it. That's why when you affirm, you only increase these Me Too drugs and decrease the innovative drugs. And companies will cut R&D spending by 32.7%. That's from Vernon because they can no longer recoup the cost of capital that they put in. That's why empirically, Clinton tells you that price controls decrease R&D investment by $1.6 billion, which Santier tells you would have led to 198 fewer drugs, which Lloyd tells you can save 350 million people around the world. We outweigh on scope because we're worldwide. You negate.
Okay, we're gonna take that.
Yours.
Yeah.
I'm going to start on the top of my case, and I'll tell you where I'm going from there. Is everybody good? Start on the Mizuki term that basically says that the companies are going to delay the generic entry, but I would say that means they have to outsource into another country. That doesn't make any sense because US is the biggest market in the world. The pharmaceutical company aren't just going to move to another market. They need to prove on probability why that's true. Then they say that generics are going to be really affordable in the long term, even if they can't afford the brand name drugs. But people are dying right now. We tell you 1/3 of Americans cannot afford the drugs, and 125,000 people are dying because of these high costs. We can't wait. We can't afford to wait for these long-term solutions based on urgency. That's why the cost of evidence is the cleanest way for you to vote around. They basically concede this. When you implement price control, you reduce costs by 40%. The minute you vote AF, you reduce these costs and you save these 125,000 lives. If you don't want to evaluate the rest of the round, sign your ballot right there. Go to the second warrant about consolidation. They say merchant acquisitions are really good because small businesses need to be bought up to create competition. That's not true. They don't respond to the Fox evidence and the Gagnon evidence that says all of these acquisitions are killer acquisitions because monopolies don't want competition, which is why they buy up patents from other smaller companies, then kill off these patents. That's what the Suit analysis says. We solve this for two different reasons. One, the reason why they buy up these patents is to be able to increase their prices. If they can't increase prices, they don't buy up patents. But secondly, on capacity, we tell you if you decrease their revenue, they don't have the ability to pay for these mergers and acquisitions, which are the Brecky analysis is going to win us around by by concluding that when you implement price controls, you decrease market share of these large branded monopolies by 15%. This links us into their third contention, our R&D. They just say Me Too drugs increase in our world because they cost a low amount. But I tell you, on risk of offense, that's not true. The light analysis says that all of the innovations happening in status quo, 90% of them have no clinical significance because these monopolies exist and they are complacent. If you want to urge for good innovation, we tell you the only way you do that is by implementing price controls, so the only drugs that actually have an advantage is the ones that have a clinical significance, and that's the only way you can make a high profit margin is by making good drugs with good R&D. But the second way you can vote for us is on the NIH turn, which is completely dropped in the round. We tell you that 73% of the good innovation comes from the public sector. The reason why this is true is because the public sector actually cares about the common welfare of the people. And Engelbert explains, when you vote after, you can save the government $80 billion on drug costs, which they can divert back into research and development in the public sector, who are the only ones that care about the welfare of the people. So please vote out.
Let's talk about the NIH turn. This information about like redirecting funding. Where was that in rebuttal?
That was in rebuttal.
No, it wasn't. It was read as
And
defense.
oh, you mean the money that
Like
goes to the public
redirecting the
sector?
money. Where was that in rebuttal?
Oh, that was based on like the quantification of the money from our case.
But you
too.
didn't. You never said that would be
Like
redirected to
consumer
the redirected to the NIH. Did you in rebuttal?
I thought I did. I'm pretty
Okay.
sure I did. But like
the point is, you guys didn't really respond to the NIH in summary. I would say this is like pretty late.
No,
Can
the
we
way
ask you
we.
a question?
Okay, yeah, go for it.
Okay, so you say that even if we can't afford the brand name drugs right now, in the long term, you solve for this with generics.
Okay, you say like,
So, like
A,
how?
the majority of prescription drugs right now, like, are
You
already
said
like
your words in
right?
summary was in the long term, you solve
Yeah.
for this problem.
Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
you explain? Can you
Yeah,
explain
okay,
how?
yeah,
Like, do
sure.
you know
So,
when?
like,
No,
a drug has to be innovated before it can be sold to consumers, right?
Right.
So that innovation happens first.
So, how
and
long-
then
how
after
long
the
are
patent
we-
expires, generics
Can I
enter
ask
the
a
market.
quick follow up?
Yeah.
How long are we waiting?
I don't know,
So
like
the
5
average-
years.
I think we've
That's,
been
like,
waiting for
pretty
20
long.
years because there are drugs that are produced in the
Like,
1980s
we-
that people still can't
Like
afford.
which one?
Look,
Okay.
guys. So we've
Okay,
been
wait,
trying.
look.
Like cancer
We
cures
can-
and
Can I
So,
just like
let's-
contextualize
wait,
a little
cancer
bit?
was
Like
definitely
you,
not cured.
okay, so
It's not
can
like
I-
a
can I
cure, but
just-
it's a-
guys. Can I just contextualize?
Yeah,
a little
Yeah,
bit?
go for
Like
it.
we've been saying, the free market's going to work for the past 50 years. If 1/3 of Americans still can't afford these drugs, that's probably time to take a step in the right direction. You can ask a question.
Okay, so if you don't have a drug in the first place, can people buy it?
We have lots of drugs right now, so I'm not sure what new. So you're talking about
so
innovation now,
this
or
is
are you
like-
talking about generics? Because generics are like the
Yeah, I'm
same.
talking about
So
innovation.
you guys try
Okay.
to draw a pretty drastic dichotomy, right? It's like it's not like when you vote F, all the drugs we've already made disappears. We say
Yeah.
there's a lot of good innovation that we agree happens right now, but
Okay.
nobody can afford it, which is why access has to
I
be
mean,
evaluated
somebody
first.
can afford it.
That's
You
probably-
tell me that a
Like,
third of
when-
Americans don't fill their prescriptions because of
when
price.
one-
That concedes 2/3 of Americans can buy these drugs, right?
Okay, but at the same time, like the innovation argument is
I
completely
would say-
separate from like the generics argument
Even
that we
if
were
that's
just talking
true,
about,
if
right?
1/3 of Americans are dying because they can't afford their drugs, it's just not a good
Wait,
thing
1/3
for
of
you.
Americans are not dying.
You tell me
No,
125,000.
can't afford,
Yeah,
and
but 125,000 died, right?
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
cool.
that is
cool.
like
Yeah,
the
you
first.
guys have a question.
Or actually, is it our turn for the question?
Yeah, it is.
So on delays, why does it take so long
Okay,
to
so
tell them
I
that?
think
Wait,
you
can I
guys-
finish my
yeah.
question? How long does it take for them to say you have to set your price at this level?
Wait, it's not like the government's just like, oh, you set the price at this level. The government's like, oh, what does your product do? And the company's like, oh, it does this. And the government's like, this price. And the company's like, no, I want this price. And the government's like, no, I'm giving you this price.
So
and
why does that-
wait,
why
like,
does that
if we're just
stop
looking
them
at,
from
if we're
innovating?
just looking at, we're not, it's not a link into
What price
innovation.
are we
It's
on?
a
It's
completely
a separate contention.
So why
But,
does
like,
it stop
if
them
we're
from
just
entering
looking-
into the market
like,
if they're already
okay,
here right
because
now?
if they don't have a price, then they can't enter the market, right? Like,
So it's
if
about
we
new
look
drugs
to
then
other
that don't
countries-
have a price yet.
No, but also if you implement a price control, every single drug has to go through this
So
negotiation
they're just going to
process.
take
Can you
them off the
explain-
shelves and then
Like,
wait
they
for them to find a
probably
price
do
and then
it
put them
step
back.
by-
Can you guys
Yeah,
explain
like-
something really quickly? Why
Yeah.
do they want to delay these drugs?
It's not like they want
Oh, okay. So why?
It's like in Europe, when you implement price controls, the way it works is that like the negotiation takes 2.6 years. So if you look
but the
to price
evidence we
controls
called for said
in
it was
other
because they
places,
outsourced to the United States. And
No,
that's
that
what
was a
delayed
separate
entries.
turn read on your first
No,
contention. This
no,
is our
that,
first
no, that was the
You didn't
the
call for
evidence.
evidence.
This
on
sounds
delays.
super muddled. Probably vote for the clearest warrant.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's-
We're going to take the remaining 50 seconds of practice. Okay, scrap. Okay. I'm actually gonna go. Yeah, I'm gonna ask next.
Okay.
start on generics, they never respond to the fact that generic prices overall are decreasing by 12%. They say we can't afford to wait, but I would say it's pretty easy to afford to wait if you know that nobody can access this drug if it's never developed in the first place. We are the prerequisite to accessibility here. Then on M&As, they say that we have quiller acquisitions, but this is a response. Their warrant is that companies buy up other companies because they don't want to compete with them. But big companies don't compete with small companies because small companies don't have the marketing infrastructure to compete with big companies. This is why it's a symbiotic relationship where big companies buy small companies and give them the marketing infrastructure to allow these drugs to be brought to market. But then at the bottom of the case, realize they can't go for this world stuff because it's not true that like the price is determined by the market you're from. It's the market you're in. So obviously this doesn't stand at the end of the day. The cleanest way to vote is on delays. They completely muddle this with the term I read from Mizuki. This is not the term that says that companies exit the market. This is just saying the federal negotiation process takes 2.6 years because you have to negotiate the price of this drug. And Spiegel tells you that 600,000 people die each year because of delayed treatment. This is not about colon cancer. This is specific to federal negotiations because of delays. Please call for the card if you have any doubt about it. This is going to outweigh them on scope. If 125,000 Americans die each year, but 600,000 die each year because of this negotiation, they'll be automatically outweigh here on scope. Then the second way you're going to vote is on third contention on R&D. Remember, they tell you that right now R&D is being done on Me Too drugs, but in second cross they concede that the cost of these Me Too drugs is very low, which means that the vast majority of R&D spending is probably being spent on these 4,000 new innovative drugs, which means the first place where they would cut is these innovative drugs. But then they try to add some new analysis to this NIH turn and make it a turn in second summary. First, they don't read this in rebuttal, don't buy it. Second of all, there's no probability that they would divert this funding. But third of all, this doesn't respond to the Santerre analysis. Even if the government subsidized some form of innovation, we say company innovation would be cut. That's still terminal defense, or that's still offense for you to go off of. Remember, when Clinton tried to implement price controls, you saw prices decrease by $1.6 billion, which Santerre tells you would have led to 198 fewer industry drugs. Even if the government conducts innovation, we're not talking about them cutting innovation, we're talking about company cutting innovation. And Lloyd says that right now we're conducting innovation to save 350 million people. This is going to outweigh on scope. One, because we're accessing the entire world, whereas they're only accessing US prices. But two, we would say it's a lot more important to help people in developing countries insofar as they're the ones with the least quality of life.
We're going to take thoughts. Okay, is everyone ready? The first place we win the debate is off of access. They say that generics are reducing the price right now by 17%. But remember what Andrew pointed out in summary. They're assuming that this is going to be a long-term trend. We've been waiting for 20 years, and the Waxman evidence is very explicit. The price has risen by 10% annually in the long term. We don't even know if the solution is going to continue. You prefer hours on the long-term, more holistic analysis. But secondly, 1/3 of Americans still can't afford them. 125,000 people are dying right now. We don't have time to wait for when somehow generics are going to make it more affordable. Which is why the easiest place for you to vote is off of our first link on directly setting the price. They have not touched this once in today's round. The cost to evidence is very specific. The moment you implement price controls, you reduce prices by 40%. You weigh this on probability. You have no idea if research and development is going to get cut in the first place. You have no idea if the public sector won't just subsidize it. And you have no idea if negotiations is going to take forever so that 600,000 people die. But you know for a fact that you can save 125,000 lives. That always on probability. But then, even if you want to look at innovation, we still win it by winning our consolidation argument. They just say that small businesses aren't competitive with large companies, but of course they are. They produce the drugs at a smaller price point that undercuts monopolies, which is why they engage in killer acquisitions. They shut them out of business, buy them up, and drown them out. That's why 64% of the market is controlled by one company and not small businesses. Price controls fix this because A, we take away the incentive. If they can't hike prices, they have no incentive to have a monopoly. But B, we all agree we reduce their revenue, we reduce their capacity to merge and acquire in the first place. The Brecky analysis is very specific. We reduce their market market share by 15%. This is a link into innovation because monopolies are the ones that are making the system incredibly inefficient. They are not curing cancer. They're just changing Advil to ibuprofen. If we break them down and have competition, that is the driving force of innovation in the first place. But secondly, and independently on innovation, you can vote for us off of the Me Too drugs turn. They just say that it's more, that they're probably going to influence it into research and development, but that hasn't happened. 90% are really clinically insignificant. If you have fewer resources, that increases the quality. The same thing happened in the European Union. The same thing can happen in the United States. That's why we're very proud to affirm. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.